So we're here to talk about suicide, teen suicide specifically, right? This is a major problem. In the world, internationally, we know that there's one suicide every 40 seconds. In South Africa, 23 suicides a day and 20 suicide attempts a day. Of this, we know that 79% of people that commit suicide are from lower and middle income groups. The demographics important to know because when you think about yourself and you think about suicide, wonder about these categories, right? It's the third leading cause of death for children between 15 and 19 years old. And that is also our risk group. Our highest risk group in South Africa is between 10 and 19 years old. But we do know that there have been cases of suicide earlier than that. So it's important to watch and to know your child from very early to understand who they are, because one of the preventative measures as a parent is to understand who your child is and how they may change when things change in their lives. So we know that 9.5% of all teenage deaths are suicide related. 75% of them do give us warning signs of an intention to harm themselves or to inform us of where they are at. But it is about taking the time to understand and listen around what it is. We will talk more about that in detail just now. 23.6% of teenagers in South Africa feel a significant sense of hopelessness and a significant sense of sadness. Quite worrying because the number's high, 23.6%. And a third of all our hospital admissions are for suicides in teens. We also know that girls, rather than boys, are more likely to attempt suicide. So the attempt at communication and that gender stereotype around girls and boys. But those are the numbers in the country around teenage suicide. There are certain things which make kids more vulnerable to depression and to suicide. We do know that depression and suicide are linked. So when we're looking at risk factors, we are aware that if there's a presence of mental illness in the family and in the child, that there's a greater likelihood of them being vulnerable to suicide. So to be more vigilant with your child if this is the case. The amount of pressure that teenagers are under in regard to peers and to academics, given the high levels of competition in the country, makes them more vulnerable. So to also be aware of the extent to which their academic problems are a risk factor and to help them to cope so that we don't go there, so that they are feeling adequate and they're feeling on top of their work and that they are skilled to be able to deal with the pressures of school. Because they're teenagers, parents become chopped liver in teenagers' lives. For teenagers, it is about their friends, about what their friends think of them, of how they fit into the peer group. This is important for their identity development and it's appropriate. But rejection by friends is a huge issue for children. For teenagers, they struggle when they're rejected, when they're not part of the group, when they are bullied. And there's much of that around. It is rife. So to be able to know where your child is at in terms of their comfort in their friendship levels, to be able to talk to them about interaction and relationships, important. Of course, inevitably, the parental worry about teenagers are relationships, romantic relationships. Another big source of risk for your child around losing a relationship, and feeling like the sense of loss is big for them, and depression that might come along with that. So be aware of that as a risk factor. Family violence is a very big issue in relation to teen suicide and teen depression. To be aware of the nature of the violence and the trauma. And this is important not only in terms of physical violence, but also verbal interaction and what this means for the child. Any trauma, any significant loss is something that you need to be aware of around a potential risk factor for depression that could lead to suicide. A history of suicide in the family is also a risk factor because it illustrates for the child a way of solving a problem. And that is also something that one needs to be aware of. So when we're talking about suicide, we're talking about the end of a spectrum, right? So we know that it is linked to depression. So we spoke about teenage helplessness and sadness, and we know that if that's untreated or not addressed, it can become depression. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about depression so that we know what we're looking for to prevent it becoming suicidality. All right. So in terms of the signs, we're looking at children who show a significant loss of interest in the activities that they had enjoyed before. So a loss of enjoyment, right? Along with that, a persistent sadness that is unshakable almost. There might be variations, the mood being slightly higher, but a persistent sadness. And along with that, or as another symptom, a sense of irritability, just being on the edge, as though they can become angry very quickly. Also, so anger is not uncommon to be seen. With teenagers, generally they sleep a lot more than adults. So the thing to watch with teenagers is the low energy that is also persistent and that accompanies this consistent tiredness. They don't recover from the tiredness. It's just this low energy that's there always, that accompanies, and very crucially, the feelings of guilt and the feelings of hopelessness that persist and just are not changeable. You'll see it in changes in their diet, either eating excessively or not eating at all. It's more common to see them not eating at all and accompanying weight loss with that. And then, of course, changes in their sleep pattern. So often not being able to sleep at night. It's more common to see the change in sleeping pattern, not being able to sleep. But the atypical presentation is to sleep excessively. Then you'll see a significant drop in school performance. The ability to concentrate will definitely be lower. And often there are thoughts of suicide. And we will talk a little bit about the thoughts of suicide, because suicide also has within it almost a continuum that we must look at. And of course, the children will be quite withdrawn, not want to socialize because there is no joy in it for them, so feeling quite disconnected from their peers. All right. So we see it also in terms of suicide, along the spectrum, from sadness to the depression, which we've just discussed now, to suicide. Within that, when you start seeing the warning signs for suicide, is when the depression exists, the symptoms of depression exist, and when your child is starting to say things like, nothing matters anymore. Um, I'm just a waste of space. Everyone will be better off without me. Warning signs. Something very significant is going on with your child. It's time to seek help. Talking or joking about suicide. That is another sign. The self-criticism. I can't do anything right. I'm not a good person. I don't belong with my friends. That kind of sentiment, something that must be watched for. When it's more subtle, watching them almost say goodbye. Things like, thank you very much for everything you've done for me. Start that things they might say, giving away things that they really like, their precious things, giving it away to friends, a sure sign that they're planning something. A drastic personality change. So they had before been depressed and hopeless, and suddenly you see a change without any intervention, a change in the energy. Often, if there's a suicidal ideation, the child has made some kind of decision that liberates them somehow. So it's a decision, usually, if they're suicidal, to actually act on it. And there's a freedom that comes with that, and an ability to feel like they can enjoy what's left because they're saying goodbye. So that is a very worrying part of the suicide cycle. When they start undertaking behaviors that are highly risky for them. Also another concern, writing poems and essays, posting things on social media that are related to death is a clear sign. And then suddenly feeling better. So also in the suicide continuum, it will start with a small idea of it would be better not to be here. Where they're not planning anything yet. It's just starting to emerge as an idea. And if it's untreated, it starts to amplify. It starts to become real as a possibility. And that range also needs to be tracked. And the sooner that you get it, the better. Because it's not going to become a full suicidal plan. So as a parent, this is a huge responsibility. Because it does require a presence to be able to monitor your child consistently around the emotional and mental well-being. So to be attuned to when there is a change in their mood, and to be attuned to when there's a change in how they're dealing with things in the way they normally would have dealt with it. So just to be present and to watch. That's the first thing you need to do. To listen with more than just your words. To listen to what they're saying and to what they're not saying. And to try and understand that in the frame of your child's reality. I think sometimes it is difficult because things happen in a family, things happen in a marriage that often we don't think impacts the child, but to be listening for what that might be doing to the child. And especially if it's in relation to the important things in the child's life. So if something is happening in a peer group, to be aware of that and to wonder about that with your child. If your child is presenting with any of the signs that I've spoken about, to take them very seriously, rather to seek the help that you think might assist the child than to leave it, because we want to err on the side of caution and prevent this from becoming a suicide attempt. So to intervene quickly and taking it seriously, to seek professional help. In terms of managing your child and the emotionality, is to be empathic with where they are at. I think this often becomes difficult because teenagers are so different from adults. But to try and immerse yourself in what their worlds may be and to understand it from their perspective, to encourage them to talk to you about what may be going on. And even if they do not talk to you, to imagine with them what they might be feeling is very containing for a child because they know that you are there and they know that you're trying to understand. A positive thing to do with children that we know impacts the biochemistry of depression is exercise. So to encourage doing some exercise just to get those endorphins going so that the biochemistry can start to rebalance on its own again. And then also to make sure that if your child is suicidal, that your environment is safe, that there are no guns easily accessible, that tablets that they can overdose on are not visible and accessible to them.